Welcome back to Digi Bros, everybody!
Why you gonna be so rude?
We're down in the forest. I feel good. This is definitely... I'm looking forward to you exploring this area. This is a cool place. Look at this
show
house.
You a secret, too.
This house... you know what this really reminds me of, actually, is Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, definitely. This whole area gives me that vibe.
The early part of Resident Evil 4.
Yes.
Which is a really sweet game. I've played it on the show before.
Yes.
Without you there.
There's a spooky dude inside of this.
A spooky duke.
Which we're not
See
paying attention to the dialogue, so it doesn't really matter. But give me tonsil stone. That's
another
nice.
thing well, on the one hand, I would say I need to look into the plot of this game.
You really do, because it's super cool.
I mean, yeah, but at the same time, I never really looked into the plot of Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Most of my understanding of it is from
The plot of this game is way more interesting to me than the plot of Dark Souls.
Most of my understanding of the plot of Dark Souls is from that Dark Souls lore explained video, the funny fucking one. I would love it if we got one of those for Bloodborne. And, oh, by the way, here's another thing I want to talk about. Man, because today, another episode of Yahtzee's playthrough of Dark Souls 2 came out. And, it was really interesting to watch that right after watching you play Bloodborne. Because, indeed, the way the combat is so much slower. You know, it's much more of like a sturdy feeling, like, you know, old school fantasy setting.
Yeah.
And I think I realized the biggest problem with that game's environments. Because Dark Souls 2 actually has, like, great variety in its places.
Yeah.
Like,
it's just they don't feel like they flow together at all.
Well,
or they're connected.
There's no flow between anything. It's all, like, random. And people have criticized the fact that it's a lot of castles. And, you know, when I think about it, I actually kind of like, maybe not necessarily for a Souls game, but I like the idea of, like, this modern 3D, like, cool action game dungeon crawler that is, like, that's in all castles, because it feels very old school, you know?
That's the idea with this game to me, is that it's like Castlevania. You go into a city, and everything is connected in the city, and it's just one big castle, essentially.
Right. Well, this game is much more sprawling, but, like...
Not really. I mean, we're about to... Watch when I go up this ladder.
Okay.
This is one of my favorites. We are now at the very beginning of the game.
Oh, yeah. I remember
you unlock this gate, and this is where you literally, like, start off walking out of the clinic.
I mean, the interconnectedness of the worlds in in the Souls games is one of the coolest things about them. But, like, what I mean when I say sprawling is that it's a big gothic city. Like, you're in the city. It doesn't feel like this is not what Castlevania's like.
Yeah.
Castlevania, well,
I mean, that's usually like one.
Maybe Castlevania 3, you could say it's like this, because it's actually a while, or 4. Like, it takes a while before you get to the actual castle. You're more like exploring the area around the castle to get to it, and then you trek through the castle. Or Castlevania 1 is like...
These motherfuckers are
you start
terrifying.
off there. But, like, the thing about Dark Souls 2 is, like, it's kind of cool that it feels so medieval fantasy. Like, it's like, the aesthetic of the game is perfectly medieval. Like, you know, this is what those old D&D games were about. This is that place you were playing through. And I realized the problem that everyone has with that game isn't really that it's all castles. It's that it's all rectangles. Every room is just a rectangle.
I didn't even mind that it's all castles, because if you can... The problem I have with that game is that it's all castles, and the castles are small.
Yeah,
where it's like you don't feel like you're exploring this. Like, it's not like Inner Londo where you're exploring a small bit of a big city or a big castle.
It's like
you just go through and you're like,
mini castles.
You're like, why is this castle 3 rooms? Like, what? This doesn't make any sense.
It's weird because, like, everything is like, nothing feels. Again, if I use the word topography, like, it is the polar opposite of Bloodborne in this regard.
Yes.
In Bloodborne, everything is a rise, a slope, like look at what you're standing on right now. You're on, like, a roof that's connected to other roofs, and, like, there's stairways everywhere, and you're always going up and down and around. And in Dark Souls 2, like, every room is just a fucking room. It's just a rectangular room. Yeah. You know, like, I mean, it changes up sometimes, but, like, I was watching them play, and there's, like, long stretches where you're just going from room to room to room to room with no variation. They're all just the same thing, you know. Whereas in this game, I feel like it's almost excessive how much it's different, you know, like how I don't know where the fuck I am because there's so much going on visually.
This is where you start to see weird experimentation blue people around.
Yeah.
What's with the blue people?
Is that one of the failures?
Yeah. Well, it's it's like a failed experimentation on making humans.
But it's the same thing as what the
beings,
living failures are, but
kinda.
a failed not living failure. Who's talking to you? Who's talking?
She's up the stairs. She will kill me right now, so I'm not gonna fight her yet.
I see.
She is the imposter Yosefka, because basically if I had gone backwards at the beginning of the game, I would have talked to a girl through a doorway who's in this clinic, and then you now go through the back door of the clinic and you find that this woman is posing as her, and then you find that basically the woman you were talking to at the beginning is turned into one of these blue things.
So like the major themes of this game's story are sort of like
I got
birth,
the cane or something.
Experimentation, this.
Well, it's blood and it's birth, and like there's a lot deals with menstrual blood and the purest.
I guess the
of
title
bloods.
Bloodborne.
The whole plot has to do with blood, but yeah, there's lots of blood experimentation.
It has to do with
going on.
birth a lot too,
yeah.
which is why the born in Bloodborne, because there's a lot of themes of
being
like,
born
childbirth.
of blood is pretty literal.
Yeah. I mean, we're all born of blood, but
yes.
you know, it's interesting. I definitely think it's cool that this game has like this.
I've been meaning to go and
thematic.
Do a bunch of research on the plot of this game so I can really talk about it in depth on here, because like it's so cool to me.
Well, like what I like about it is that you know, there's sort of the way this game is. We've talked about before how it starts off fairly normal and then it goes like further and further off the deep end. But like it's very clearly like gothic horror and Lovecraftian horror, right?
Yes.
Like those are the two big things. But the whole aspect of the birth and the hospitals and the blood is like something else. Like like that's something really unique to this game, that it's like it's not just so cool that it's Lovecraft or just that it's like, you know,
well, it's like the blood experimentation Dracula. Is like their way of like trying to like modify themselves to become closer to the gods and stuff, and it's just like all this shit, and it's like they're trying to create basically the perfect vessel so that the gods can like impregnate the vessel and like create, you know, like the gods want to be born in our world, but like they can't interact with it directly or something, and so like they're trying to create the vessel to birth one of the elder gods into our world.
Yeah,
it's like pretty ridiculous shit, which I need to like reverse myself on it, but there's lots of stuff that me and Shade were talking about where it's like references to Lovecraft stories where there's lots of symbolism with the oceans and the moon,
right,
and like interesting things about that.
Here's something I kind of just figured out how to put into words about this that I find interesting, because like one of the things that caught my attention first about this game is that there's a lot more like the enemies can talk. And there's a lot more like sentience in this world. Yes. And the way I would put it is that all of the Souls games are apocalyptic, right? It's like you're in the midst of the apocalypse. None of them are quite post-apocalyptic. They're all like at I would say
this is certainly the apocalypse is happening actively.
But I would say that what's interesting about this one compared to the other two is that Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2 all take place like, well, Dark Souls 2 is just stupid, but Demon Souls and Dark Souls both take place at like the tail end of the apocalypse, where like it's still kind of happening. There's still people around, but like everyone's kind of lost hope, and most people are dead already.
It's really at the end of a cycle that's about to restart,
right?
Because
and I would say this game takes place at the beginning of the like shit has just hit the fan here. You know, like there's people who are just locked indoors because they're waiting for this to blow over, kind of thing.
Like everyone knows that this night is gonna be like shit's gonna hit the fan.
There's a lot of the bosses, you meet them right when they're transforming. Like we just saw the woman, the what's her name, Vicar Amelia, or Father Gascoigne, where like they were still kind of human, and then they transform right in front of you. Whereas in Dark Souls, everyone you fight, you know they were once human. Yeah. Like because the lore in Dark Souls is always like, you know, they went hollow at some point.
Yeah, they were cool,
fought them,
and now they're not.
You know, and you do watch NPCs go hollow throughout the game, but it's sort of like the last dregs of humanity are going hollow around you, and it's like, this is the end. Whereas this game is more like, everything was normal a couple days ago, you know, and now it's really fucked, you know.
Stuff's been actively happening. You learn some more in the DLC about the old hunters, and I think it kind of alludes to the fact that like something that happened a while ago is what caused this all to spiral downhill.
Which I mean is a bit more Lovecraftian in itself, because Lovecraft stories were always sort of like about encounters in like the back alleys of like the apocalypse was about to happen.
Yeah.
Sort of like discovering like the moment that a normal person discovers that shit's about to change for everybody, you know. Yeah. The actual Nyarlathotep story, which is only like a page long. It's very short.
Nice.
The Nyarlathotep story is basically like this Egyptian god essentially shows up, which is Nyarlathotep, and he just starts like showing people videos of like all this crazy shit, and like this is like a time when like movie projectors were new, you know, like a brand new technology, and he's like showing like videos and scenes to people, and basically everyone's sort of like becoming a part of his cult and losing their minds, and then like the narrator saying how like the streets are changing, and now there's like all kinds of shady stuff happening.
His head exploded into snakes.
Basically, Nyarlathotep is very short and very esoteric, but it's essentially describing that the entire town starts changing into like, you know, like something other like this game basically. Yeah. Like it's a period where like an elder god has showed up and is changing the nature of the city, and
yeah, there is evidence in this game that there might have been first contact with an elder god, and like that's what led them to end up changing all these things and like trying to get closer to them. And then like me and Shade have theorized that it's like you find this god in the DLC, and it's called Kos, and so we've theorized that is like the first god they made contact with. Which I'll explain later when we find it.
Another thing about this game that I think captures Lovecraft well, and like I think the Souls games, because they've always had elements of Lovecraftian horror, and I think that what makes them a perfect fit for it is how spotty the narrative is, how you don't have all the info. Because the thing about Lovecraft is that like a lot of what's understood as like the Lovecraft mythos was not really made by him, or the Cthulhu mythos rather, was not really made by him. Like his stories are all like, they imply that they're kind of connected, or they imply that there's like all these things going on, but they don't really tell you anything about it. And like the first story of his that I read was The Stranger, which is like this guy is trapped in an underground castle for like hundreds of years. He doesn't know how much time has passed, right? Or he like grew up in this castle, but then as the centuries passed, he was the only one there, and he's just been reading books and doing nothing for literally he has no idea how long. And it's like it's sort of like it's an underground castle. He's never seen like the light of day. He's just been in this underground place forever, and he finally one day decides he's going to climb out. So he spends like days and days climbing this castle that just keeps going on and on forever upwards, and then finally at the top he reaches like a trap door, and he opens that door, and he's on the surface world. He's finally made it out, right? So we're talking about a castle that goes underground for days, and he climbs out of it onto the surface world. He's wandering through like a field at night, and then he sees a house with the lights on, and he like goes up to the window, and like he goes inside, and everyone starts freaking out, and everyone's like, you know, in unbelievable horror. And of course Lovecraft's language is always like unspeakable, unthinkable, most horrendous screams that shattered through the night, and like unbelievable amount of words that he uses. But then the guy looks over to the side, and he sees the creature that everyone's terrified of, and he's just as terrified, and then he realizes it's a mirror, and that's what he is. But then the last paragraph is like, he realizes that he's no longer, like, he can no longer fit in with human society, so he goes off and then he starts describing, like, he's saying, like, he goes off to this place and like interacts with all these people, but the names he's using are like these locations that don't exist, these like names of elder gods. Like basically this guy goes off to live with the elder gods, and he just name drops all these fantasy creatures that you have no idea what any of it means. And at first when I read it, I was like, is this like, do I have to read all his other stories? Are these characters in his other stories? But then I realized it's just like, you're not supposed to know.
Uh-huh.
You know, you just suddenly get all these hints of this greater world of things going on that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
And you know, and it was only like after Lovecraft died, it was like his understudies who sort of like took what he had done and like wrote more stories in his universe and like fleshed out that universe and made it like a more like, you know, like there was a mythos behind it rather than just hinting at a mythos. And I think that Bloodborne and the Souls games are a great example of like that kind of storytelling where like they kind of clue you in, like, oh, there's this elder god in this world that, and you don't know what the fuck it is. You have no idea what it's about. You know what universe it comes from. It's just there.
Yes.
You know, there's all these like name dropping fictional beings that you've never heard of, and leaving you to wonder what it all means.
Which like there's a boss in this game that talks to you a lot because it's just like a human, and like he's just name dropping like, you know, gods and shit, and then like in the DLC you actually get to meet that god he was talking about that's like not alluded to in any other way, and you're like, oh, holy shit, this makes sense now.
Yeah. I really like Lovecraftian storytelling.
Yes.
You know, not like I know that there's a lot of people who either don't like Lovecraft's writing or don't like him as a person or don't like the idea of like you know, saying that everything's Lovecraft influenced.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really convenient way to describe a certain kind of horror that I really, really like, you know.
Yes.
This game is clearly paying homage directly to his stories, you know.
If you didn't Super Bunny Hop do a video on
yes, he did.
On like the direct references to
Shade tells me that this guy's a DLC guy, right?
Yes.
And he said that he's like the Sunbro of this game.
Yeah, basically.
And he teaches you
he's the master of the league.
The meta of cool. I've also been like learning more about the meta of this game. It definitely seems like the make contact gesture and also that guy's salute gesture are like the popular gestures in this game.
That guy's cool. And I wanted the DLC for this area because when we fight the boss, I'm just gonna summon a dude who's added by the DLC who makes it way easier. Even though maybe I should just fight the boss because I've been doing alright. It's just like a boss I don't particularly enjoy.
We shall see when the time comes. So yeah, I like Lovecraft mythos.
Yeah.
I kind of, a big part of me wants to play Yahtzee's game, The Consuming Shadow, which is a Lovecraft mythos game that's sort of like a roguelike. The only reason I haven't is that it does not look like my type of game at all. Like, atmospherically and narratively, it seems really cool and interesting, but like, the mechanics of it are, you know, it's a tough roguelike game, and it's really weird the way it plays, but probably would have played it if it had been free, but Yahtzee finally decided he was going to start charging for all of his games because he realized that he owes, like, he realized that it's like a duty to the economy that he does that, you know? It was like, I feel like I have an economic responsibility to push the market forward by charging for my games, which I think is a really good perspective. And I would buy it if not for the fact that it doesn't seem like my type of game, you know, so not much sense in it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Next time on
More
Digi Bros.
You can play the Yogg.
Next time on Digi Bros.